I am the dust beneath your feet, the unnoticed earth that receives everything and says nothing. I have no voice, yet I remember. I do not move, yet I carry the weight of centuries. I have lain beneath sandals and blood, beneath silence and screams, beneath hopes that bloom and griefs that refuse to fade. I remember a day when a woman knelt upon me, not out of reverence but collapse. Her breath was shallow, torn, as if each inhale ripped through her chest. Her hands pressed into me, trembling not with fear but with the ache of something broken beyond repair. She did not wail. She did not scream. The silence that clung to her was heavier than Morninjit, was the silence of someone who had nothing left to say, only tears left to spill. And I received them, each drop warm and trembling, seeping into me as though seeking a place to hide. Around her, the world moved on. Soldiers marched, carts rumbled, a hawk screamed overhead. But she remained, forehead to earth, unmoving. I held her the way only soil can, without judgment, without answers, just presence. I did not ask why. I did not try to console. I simply received, and I do not forget. Her tears were not the first I drank, nor would they be the last, but they carried something more than sorrow. They held a question, unspoken yet weighty. Where are you? I had heard that question before, in groans and in songs, in whispers beneath fig trees and shouts within temple courts. It is the question that runs through me like an underground river, surfacing only when someone is broken open enough to ask it without words. There are places on my surface where flowers used to bloom, where children once danced, where prayers rose like incense. I remember them all. I remember when this very valley was green, and laughter echoed from the hills. I remember the scent of bread in the morning, the hush of evening songs sung by mothers as the sun dipped low. But now I smell ash and iron. I feel the boots of empire grind me hard. I hear no songsonly commands shouted through fear. And yet I am still here. I do not rise. I do not flee. I remain. I absorb. I remember. The woman finally stood, or rather, unfolded herself from my surface. Her face was lined with salt and dust. Her eyes searched the empty road, but she did not cry out again. She turned, slowly, and walked away, not toward home but toward silence. And I wanted to cry, not for her, but for all that was lost in her. Because I know when a mother weeps like that, something ancient dies, and something desperate is born, a longing, not for revenge, not even for justice, but for salvation. And that is the word I've come to understand best, not because I've seen it, but because I've missed it. Across centuries, through the ruins of kingdoms and the rise of tyrants, I've waited for someone who would answer the tears, not just explain them, not just mourn with them, but answer them. I have held prophets. I have heard promises. I remember the voice of Isaiah, how it was read aloud once beneath an olive tree, how the wind seemed to carry it even after the scroll was rolled. He was despised and rejected by men, a man of sorrows, acquainted with grief. Those words fell into me like seeds, buried deep, waiting. So I keep listening, I keep holding, I keep remembering. I hold the tears not as burdens, but as prayers made of salt and silence. Prayers that wait not for an answer, but for a presence. And I wonder, what if that presence is near? What if, even now, the tears of this mother have not vanished but risen? What if, beneath the silence, there is a movement in the heavens? I am only dust. I do not see stars, but I feel weight. I feel shift. Something is stirring. I do not know when. I do not know how. But I remember when the ground split open, not from war, but from roots. When seeds whispered into me and rose green through my cracks. I remember the hush of morning dew and how children would chase the mist before the sun drank it. I remember Pisanote, the silence of after, but the fullness of now, when nothing needed to be fixed because nothing had yet been torn. The day that woman cried, I remembered all of it. Her tears awakened my memory like rain after drought. It was not just her grief I held, it was the weight of every forgotten lullaby, every broken promise, every empty cradle. Even now, as I carry these memories, I wonder if she remembers me, if she walks still, holding her sorrow like a veil, whispering to a God she cannot see but once believed in. I hope she does. I hope she knows the dust did not forget her, that I, beneath her knees, heard what heaven surely heard. And maybe that is enough, not to end pain, not to reverse time, but to know that nothing is unseen, that even the earth remembers, that even a handful of dust can hope. So I wait not for kings or soldiers or silence. I wait for a cry that is not born of loss but of birth. A new voice, a new sound, not the voice of power but of promise. A child's cry, maybe. Weak, yet more commanding than any trumpet of war. Perhaps the earth will quake again, not from death, but from arrival. Perhaps one day, a foot will step upon me and not bring grief, but peace. Perhaps the one she wept for is not far. Perhaps he is already on his way. I do not know, but I wait. I remember, I hope. I have been here long before the swords and shields, before the horns of war echoed across the hills, before men dug trenches and built walls from the bones of their fear. I am older than their maps, older than their names for things, and yet I am marked by every choice they've made. I remember the footsteps of 1,000 soldiers, each one heavy with purpose, each one certain their cause was just. I remember the weight of wheels carrying the spoils of conquest, the cries of children hidden behind shattered walls, the silent collapse of fathers who knew they could not protect what they loved. I remember the banners, the chants, the prayers screamed into the sky like weapons. And I remember what happened after the quiet, the bodies, the flies. Once, I was a garden, then a grave, then a battlefield, and always, always the same. Blood tastes the same no matter who spills it. Tears seep the same, whether from victors or vanquished. Pain is not partisan. I have felt it all, without bias, without reprieve. There is a place just beyond the city walls where I am darker than the rest, not because I am different soil, but because I have been asked to absorb more than my share. A mother once buried a cloth there. It was stained with the blood of her child. She said no words. She simply dug with her hands until they bled, pressed the cloth in, and covered it with trembling fingers. I felt every motion. I kept the memory. I remember one night when fire rained down, not from heaven but from torches wielded by angry hands. Homes disappeared in minutes, reduced to embers and screams. And in the morning, the ashes settled into me like a new skin. A man walked through what remained, his robe torn, his hands empty. He did not search for survivors. He searched for meaning. His eyes found the sky, but the sky gave nothing. No thunder, no word. Just silence so loud it made the birds flee. He knelt, pressed his fingers into my cinders, and whispered something I still cannot forget. God, if you're there, show me where to stand. And I held his knees. People say the land is sacred. They touch me, kiss me, bury their dreams in me. But they do not listen. They do not ask what I carry. They do not know that I too have a voice, though it does not shout. It waits, it watches, it remembers. I remember the face of a girl, no more than 12, who ran barefoot into the field as soldiers approached. She was not trying to escape. She was looking for her brother. I held her steps. I cradled her when she fell. I took the last warmth of her skin into my clay, and I remember, just before she stopped breathing, the way she whispered his name. That name still echoes through my grains, and yet, through all of it, I do not turn away. I cannot. I am the dust that clings to sandals, that muddies water, that fills the lungs of those too tired to weep. I am unavoidable, and still, I do not become numb. Every tear changes me. Every drop of blood alters my silence. I am not what I was. And that is the truth I whisper beneath every stone, under every footprint. That suffering leaves a mark, even in the dust, especially in the dust. I know this because I have held promises too, promises spilled in hushed voices over campfires, scratched into stone by calloused hands, whispered by dying men who still dared to believe in something more. I have felt the tremble of faith, even in those who never named it as such. I have tasted the prayers of the desperate and the defiant, soaked into me like oil poured upon an unworthy altar. And every time, I kept them. I did not let them vanish. I let them settle, ferment, deepen. I do not forget. I cannot, for I am the witness no one sees. I was there when the last priest of a burned temple whispered Isaiah's words before he died. The people walking in darkness have seen a great light. He spoke them not as truth but as a dare. And yet, the words did not fade. They burned into me. And even as darkness grows, even as more boots march and more mothers cry, I feel something rising, not in defiance, not in revolt, but in a slow, unyielding hope. The kind that is not loud but stubborn, the kind that remembers a promise older than empires. I do not know what it will look like. A child, perhaps, a word, a breath, a presence. But I feel it. I feel it like the pressure before rain, like the shift in birds before dawn. Something is coming, not to destroy but to heal, not to conquer but to dwell, not to silence but to answer. They do not see it yet. How could they? Their eyes are full of ash, their hearts too heavy with loss. But I, the dust, the dirt beneath their feet, I see differently. I feel beneath the surface. I read the tremors not just of earthquakes, but of mercy. Something holy is preparing to touch down, and I know this not because I am wise, but because I have held enough pain to recognize when something different is near, the kind of nearness that bends time, that answers questions not with explanation but with presence. So I wait. Again, I wait and I hold. I hold the weight of broken dreams and unanswered prayers, the ruin and the longing, the grief and the hunger. I hold them all because that is what I was made for, not to resist, but to remember, not to escape, but to endure. And in that endurance, perhaps, is the beginning of redemption. Not dramatic, not immediate, but real, like the first bud after a long winter, like the first breath after a cry, like the first step of someone who thought they'd never walk again. There will come a day, I believe, when the feet that tread upon me will not be weary from battle but gentle from peace, when voices will not rise in grief but in joy, when the hands that dig into me will plant not the dead but the living, not weapons but seeds. And I, who have held so much death, will hold life again. I will feel laughter in the way grass bends, in the way olive trees sway, in the way children roll across hills with no fear of falling. I will feel lightness again, not because sorrow is forgotten, but because it is finally answered. She came to me as twilight bled into the edges of the day, when even the wind seemed hesitant to move, as if it too feared to disturb the ache she carried. I had felt the weight of countless footsteps, but hers was different. She did not step. She surrendered. Her knees did not touch me as much as collapse into me, as if her bones could no longer carry what her heart had held too long. Her hands, caked in dust and memory, shook not with fear but with the exhaustion of grief that has no words left, no prayers left, only a silence that screams. She said his name once, just once, a whisper, broken not by volume but by the unbearable truth it carried. He was no longer, and yet, to her, he still was. Every tear she gave me confirmed it. She did not weep for a memory. She wept for a presence stolen too soon, for a laugh unfinished, for hands she would never hold again. I remember the way her breath caught between sobs, not like a storm, but like a jar that had shattered from within. She did not cry out to the heavens. She buried her face into me, muffling her agony against the dirt, as if she hoped the ground could absorb what heaven would not. And I held her, not because I could fix her, but because that is what I do. I receive, I remember, I remain. I felt every tremble, every shiver, every quiet collapse of her soul against my skin. And still, I did not turn away. I could not. She was the kind of broken that made the earth want to scream. But I did not scream. I let her fall apart into me, hoping that by holding her, she might not vanish entirely. I do not have arms, but I surrounded her. I do not have a voice, but I heard her. I do not have eyes, but I saw everything. I have held kings as they died, priests as they betrayed their call, soldiers as they regretted the final swing of their blade, but none of them ever marked me the way this mother did. Because she did not fight, she did not run, she did not curse. She simply wept, and her tears carried a question so deep, so old, it echoed through the marrow of time. Why? Not shouted in anger, but whispered in surrender. A question not looking for logic, but for presence, for someone to simply be near. I do not know what she believed, but I know what I witnessed. There was a moment, as the stars blinked quietly into the sky above, when her breathing slowed. Not from peace, but from depletion. She had emptied herself into me, poured out everything, every memory, every hope, every silent plea she had tucked away in the folds of daily life. And as she leaned her forehead against the soil, I felt it. Not her weight, but her surrender. She gave me what she could not carry anymore, and I, as I always do, kept it. She stayed through the cold, not because she was strong, but because there was nowhere else to go. Her home no longer felt like home, not with an empty bed and a bowl untouched. She chose the earth over her walls because only here could she be what she truly was undone, unmasked, unspoken, and I let her. I did not ask her to rise. I did not urge her to move on. I simply became the one place where her sorrow could settle without being silenced. And in that stillness, something shifted, not in her, not yet, but in me. I remembered then the stories I had once heard, stories whispered by shepherds beneath starlight, of a day when one would come to wipe every tear, to bind every wound, to gather the broken not in judgment but in mercy. I remembered the words of a prophet, long buried but never forgotten, who said the desert would bloom and the morning would dance. I did not know if the woman believed such things, but I hoped, because in her grief, she had become a vessel for longing, a mirror of the earth's deepest ache. And in that moment, I wanted to believe too, not in power, not in vengeance, but in tenderness, in the possibility that someone might to stand above the pain but to kneel beside it, that someone might press their own hands into me, leave a print that would not fade, speak a word that would not fall empty into the silence. I imagined it not with vision, but with memory, for something in her sorrow had awakened something in me. A memory older than words, older than wounds. The memory of a promise made before time had edges. When she finally stood, it was not with strength but with surrender. She carried no answers, only absence, but she walked, slowly, and I held her final step as carefully as I held her first. I did not rejoice, I did not weep, I simply remembered, for one day, I believe, she will return, not to cry, but to rejoice, not to ask why, but to say thank you. I do not know how, I do not know when, but the earth remembers, the earth believes. Until that day, I remain. Beneath fields and ruins, beneath cities and silence, I wait. I hold her name, her sorrow, her question. I hold them not as burdens, but as sacred offerings, because if there is a God who listens, then surely he hears through me. Surely he feels the weight I carry, the cries I echo, the stories I keep. And if he comes as, they say, he will not find me empty. He will find me full of longing, full of tears, full of mothers who believed enough to kneel without understanding, to trust without proof, to love without end. I waited and waited, long after the echo of angel songs faded into the hills, long after the warmth of that strange night cooled into memory. I waited with the hush of earth pressed against winter roots, with the ache of questions buried beneath stillness. Nothing came, no chariots, no armies, no signs, just wind, just silence. And silence, though gentle, grows sharp when hope lingers too long without answer. The shepherds returned to their flocks. The animals left the stable. The family, yes, even they went away. To Egypt, I heard. Or was it Nazareth? Time blurred. The footprints of the holy faded beneath the tread of ordinary days. And I, who had once cradled the cry of God, became once more what I had always been, dust beneath sandals, forgotten ground. Did I imagine it? That night, that birth, that whisper of heaven in human form. Was I merely cold earth warmed for a moment by a passing fire? I asked myself, but received no answer. I listened for him, for the weight of his feet, for the breath of his prayer, but he did not return, not then, and I began to wonder whether he ever would. The years passed. Seasons grew impatient. Spring came without song. Autumns fell like sighs. I watched empires march across me, their boots heavy with conquest, their blood staining the stones. I held them all kings and criminals, prophets and pretenders. But not him, not the one I remembered, not the one whose silence had once felt like music. Once, a woman knelt beside me. She wept, dug her fingers into the soil, as if trying to unearth something lost. She said nothing, but I felt her longing. I wanted to whisper, "He was here once." I held him, but dust has no voice, only memory, only ache. Then came the droughts, the long, cracked summers when the sky would not speak and the rivers forgot their names. Crops failed, mothers screamed, fathers grew silent, and I, the dust, was blamed. They cursed me, spat on me, stomped across my surface as if I had withheld rain from spite. But I had no answers. I had only memory, and even that began to feel like a lie. Sometimes I thought I heard his footsteps, a faint rhythm in the distance, but it would turn out to be a merchant, or a soldier, or a child chasing a goat. My soul would rise, then fall, over and over, until I learned not to rise anymore. I taught myself to forget, to stop searching, to stop waiting, and yet at night, beneath the weight of stars, I could not forget entirely. Something in me still ached when the wind shifted just so, when the moon lit a path across the hills. Something in me still whispered, he was real. I remembered his breath, his stillness, the weight of his newborn body against my skin, and that memory refused to die. I watched temples rise and fall. I felt the groan of stone being shaped into sanctuaries. I held the sandals of priests and the knees of widows. But nothing touched me the way he did. Nothing made me tremble with hope and terror the way he had. The world went on, but I remained a witness to what had once broken into time and then disappeared without explanation. People spoke of Messiah. Some claimed to be him. I watched them all. Their feet were loud, their hearts unsure. None carried the silence he carried. None walked with the stillness that bends the soul. I wanted to believe, but I could not trade memory for noise. I could not call another by his name, and so I waited still. One morning, the wind brought news, not with trumpets, but with sandals. A boy, now a man, walking again. Not here, not yet, but nearby. In Jordan, in Galilee, in desert places where only the desperate go. They said he healed, taught, touched, and I could not breathe. Could it be? Could the silence be over? Could the promise be stirring again beneath my skin? I waited that night like a bride. Every gust of wind, every falling leaf, every step across the hills made me tremble. I listened with every grain, and then I heard it. Footsteps. Familiar, though older. Heavier, but no less gentle. He was walking again. On me. Into me. And though I had buried my hope, it rose. He did not stop to explain. He did not say, "I am back." He simply walked, as if he had never left, as if the years between had only been a breath, and I, dust, forgotten, became holy ground again, not because I had changed, but because he had returned. And I knew, even before the crowd came, even before the healings, even before the storm listened to his voice, I knew this was him, the one I had held in the night. The one whose silence was never absence, the one whose waiting was always a weaving, and I, the dust, would not forget again. That night, I held his feet again, not as a stranger, not as a visitor, but as the one I had waited for. No crown, no thunder, just a man walking with purpose, eyes full of knowing, heart full of mercy, and I whispered with every grain of my being, "Welcome home." Where were you? That is the question I have carried longer than any footprint, older than the first temple stone, deeper than the roots of the oldest fig tree. I do not ask it out of anger. I ask it because I was there. I was there when the child's breath ceased and the mother's silence screamed. I was there when men raised their fists, not in worship but in vengeance. I was there when songs stopped mid-hymn and turned into cries no heaven answered, and through it all, I waited. I watched, I listened, I held their sorrow, and I did not forget. And still, the question remains, where were you? I have heard it whispered in tents lit by oil lamps, shouted in alleyways, stained with the blood of the innocent, written into scrolls hidden beneath robes no longer worn. The prophets asked it. The psalmists wailed it. Even kings fell to their knees in the dirt and begged for a whisper, a sign, a flicker of knowing. And I, the ground beneath them, kept their pleas like buried seed shopping, aching still. I have held more why than any tongue can pronounce. And yet you remain silent, not absent, not entirely, just hidden, as if you walk just beyond the veil, close enough for our souls to sense, but far enough that our hands reach through air. Were you there when her son died? Not in the general sense, not in the way people mean when they say, God is everywhere, but really there, kneeling beside her, touching the same soil I did? Did you hear the way she said his namano as a memory but as a hope she refused to surrender? Did you feel the way her body folded, not out of reverence, but out of collapse? Because I did. I held her, I bore her. I kept her safe from vanishing into the nothing. But I am only earth. I cannot speak comfort. I cannot promise anything. Maybe you were listening. Maybe you always are. Maybe you are the reason her tears did not dry up in rage. Maybe you are the reason she walked away instead of sinking entirely. Maybe that is what mercy looks like. Sometimes not lightning bolts or parted seas, but breath in the chest of someone too broken to speak. Maybe mercy is her still standing. But still I ask, why so hidden? Why so far? Why let dust hold what divinity could heal? I have felt the hands of priests bless me with oil, declaring me sacred, claiming I am hallowed ground. Yet the same soil is stained with blood. You did not stop. So am I holy, or just ignored? Am I altar or battlefield? Am I Eden or exile? I do not know anymore. I only know I am tired. Tired of soaking up tears I cannot transform. Tired of cradling bodies no longer breathing. Tired of waiting for a word that does not return void, yet never seems to come when it is needed most. Or perhaps it comes differently. Perhaps the word comes not in thunder, but in tears. Not in answers, but in questions that refuse to die. Perhaps you are nearer in the silence than in the storm, nearer in the dirt than in the stars. I think about that often, especially in the hours just before dawn, when everything is still, and the sky seems to hold its breath. Those are the moments when I feel closest to you, not because you speak, but because nothing else dares to. And in that stillness, I wonder, if the dust can ache, can you feel it? Do you still walk among us, not as fire or voice, but as breath? Do you kneel beside mothers and feel the heat of their tears in your own hands? Do you linger in ruined homes, whispering comfort we cannot hear but somehow survive by? Are you in the spaces between our cries, the thread that holds us when everything else has unraveled? I want to believe you are not far, that you are not deaf, that you are not cruel. I want to believe that all these centuries of waiting are not in vain, that every trembling step toward hope was not wasted, that every cry was not lost in the wind. I remember a story, one older than even my deepest layers, a story of a promise, that one would come out to destroy the oppressor but to carry the oppressed, not to erase grief but to fill it with meaning, not to silence the weeping but to join in it. They said he would be called Emmanuel, God with us, not above, not beyond, with. If that is true, then perhaps you are not who we imagined, but better, not the God who avoids the dust, but the one who enters it, not the God who demands sacrifice, but the one who becomes it. But if you are coming, come soon. Come not to explain, but to be. Come not to fix, but to hold. Come not with swords, but with silence, strong enough to carry our cries. Come as light that does not blind, but heals. Come as a whisper in the dirt that says, I see you, because we are tired, because she is tired, because the earth itself groans for something more than survival. We ache for redemption. And if you are who they say you are, then you have heard every cry. You have seen every mother collapse. You have felt every question echoing through the silence. So I continue to wait. I, the dust, the ground, the cradle of sorrow and hope alike. I wait not for thunder or fire, but for feet that bring peace, not power, for hands that bless, not break, for eyes that see the widow, the orphan, the forgotten. I wait for the day when my soil will no longer drink blood, but laughter. When my surface will no longer carry the weight of unspoken griefs, but the dance of redeemed ones. Until then, I carry the cries. I hold the questions. I remember the names. And I pray in my own way that you will come close enough to press your hand into the dust and call it holy. I remember a voice, not loud, not commanding, but sure. It came from a man draped in worn linen, standing beneath a sycamore tree. His hands trembled slightly, not from age but from the weight of the words he held. He opened a scroll, its edges frayed, its ink faded but not forgotten. And as he read, the air changed. Even the birds stopped singing. The words were not his. They were ancient, etched in the marrow of time itself. "Comfort, comfort my people," he said. "Prepare the way of the Lord." I felt those syllables sink into me like rain after drought. Not urgent, but steady. Not desperate, but inevitable. I remember the children who stopped to listen, their games forgotten, their faces turned upward, not toward the reader, but toward something invisible, something they somehow sensed beyond the horizon. I remember an old woman who pressed her hand to her heart and closed her eyes, as if the words were not sound but healing balm. I remember how the wind shifted, not in force but in tone, as if echoing, "Yes, yes, he is coming." And I, the ground beneath them, trembled not with fear, but with recognition, because I had heard those words before, not with ears, but with memory, with longing, with the ache only the earth understands. I have held so many words, words of anger, words of love, words meant to curse and words meant to bless. But those words, those promises carved themselves into me like the first plow through virgin soil. They marked me. They stayed, even when the scrolls were rolled, even when the people scattered, even when silence returned. I remembered, because something in me believed them, not because I am wise, not because I understand, but because I have held too much sorrow not to hope. There was another voice, years later. This one cried out in the wilderness, louder, harsher, like the scraping of stone against stone. He did not read from a scroll. He was the scroll, living and breathing, walking through sand and reed. His words were wild, unrefined, but true. "Make straight the path. He is near." He shouted into the air, and even the wind recoiled. People came to him not because they understood, but because something inside them awakened when he spoke. And I watched. I watched them step into the water. I held their feet as they entered not just the river, but the possibility of change. I remember the first time someone knelt not in grief, but in expectation. A man. Rough hands, eyes worn by disappointment but not fully emptied of wonder. He did not speak much. He simply pressed his palm to the soil and whispered, "Let it be." I felt it, not the words, but the surrender. And I knew something was near, something holy. Not loud, not obvious, but real. Like roots growing in silence beneath hard ground. Like dawn before the light breaks. Like prophecy finally remembering how to breathe. I began to sense it more often, not in the crowds, but in the quiet, in the way a mother hummed while kneading bread, in the way a child paused to watch a butterfly, in the way a traveler lingered near a fig tree longer than necessary, as if drawn by something he could not name. I held their steps. I listened to their silence, and in those silences, something pulsed beneath me, like a heartbeat, not mine, like a waiting that did not feel like absence, but imminence. There was one night, colder than most, when the stars shimmered not with distance, but with promise. I felt a tremor, not an earthquake, but a quickening. Something ancient stretched inside me, like a seed breaking open, and I heard them voices, not from the city, not from the hills, but from above, singing, not in language I knew, but in meaning I could feel. Joy, peace, arrival. For the first time in ages, I did not have to hold sorrow. I held a song. That night, the ground felt different, lighter, as if the weight of waiting had shifted, as if what had always been far was suddenly here. There were shepherds nearby, stunned, silent, and then, running. Their feet hit me like sparks, each one igniting something long asleep. They did not speak of empires or war. They spoke of a child, a manger, a mother, and the way the air felt when they saw him, not as thunder, but as truth, And I believed them, because I felt it too. He was here, not far, not promised, present. And the soil beneath that manger, I do not know if it was I, but it was like me held him. The one who would bear all the tears I had kept. The one who would walk upon me not as conqueror, but as companion. The one who would speak not to the sky, but to the forgotten. I had no voice to cry, but if I could, I would have shouted for joy. Not because the pain was over, but because, finally, it was shared. From that night on, I waited differently, not with emptiness, but with memory, not in despair, but in trust, because I knew what had begun could not be undone. Because once divinity lies in the dirt, all dirt is changed, all waiting is holy. I listened to every step with hope. I welcomed every kneeling with tenderness. I received every tear with reverence, because now they were not just sorrow, they were echoes, echoes of him, of his breath, his cry, his promise. And if he came once, unnoticed, in the quiet, then surely he will come again. And I, the dust, will be ready not just to receive him, but to recognize him, not by the sound of thunder, but by the stillness that changes everything. He did not come with a roar. He came with breath, not with fire, but with warmth, not with trumpets, but with silence that pressed gently into my skin like a whisper too sacred to name. I did not know what to expect, but it was not Thesa, newborn, wrapped in worn cloth, placed into the very dust I had become. His weight was not heavy. He was barely more than a sigh. Yet from the moment his body touched mine, I knew nothing would ever be the same. Not because I saw light, not because I heard voices, but because I felt him, and in that feeling, the ache of all ages shifted. His mother laid him down with hands trembling not from doubt, but from awe. She looked not up, but down into his face, into the ache of mystery made flesh. I held her knees as she knelt, and I felt the holy tremble through her bones into me. The way she tucked the cloth around him, the way she whispered his name, Yeshua's, if it alone could hold the universe together. I had held thousands of names. This one echoed different. It did not rest upon me. It pierced me. It settled into the deep place I did not know could still receive. He did not cry loudly. He simply breathed. And with each breath, something inside me shifted. I remembered sorrow differently. I remembered silence differently. It was as though the one who had watched over the stars had stepped beneath them not to command, but to be near, to be touched, to be held. I have been the ground of war and worship, of love and death, but never had I held something so utterly small, so absolutely whole. He did not speak, but I heard. He did not move, but I knew. This was not just a child. This was a beginning. Animals stood nearby, their breath warm against the chill. They did not bow, they simply watched, their stillness more reverent than any ceremony. A lamb stepped forward, nudged the edge of the cloth, then lay down close. I felt its heartbeat and his, side by side, rhythm matching rhythm, as if creation itself was realigning, not in thunder, but in closeness. I had long been the keeper of distance between God and man, between heaven and earth. But that night, distance died. I felt it like the breath before dawn, like dew settling after the cry. I did not understand the fullness of what lay before me, but I felt the ache in the mother's shoulders ease. I felt the father's hand tremble as he reached for the child, not with ownership, but with wonder. And I, the dust, held them all, not in grandeur, in nearness, in stillness. And that stillness was holy. For the first time, I did not carry pain, I carried presence. Not memory, but miracle. The weight of centuries did not vanish, but it no longer crushed. His being redefined it. What had once been a burden became a vessel. What had been absence became presence. What had been groaning became lullaby. Shepherds came, rough and uncertain. Their feet thudded into me with the urgency of those who've heard something too beautiful to delay. They did not come to analyze or explain. They came to see, and when they saw, they wept, not in grief, but in recognition. I watched their eyes, eyes that had seen too much hunger, too many winters, but now they softened, not with answers, but with awe. One knelt, then another. One reached forward, not to touch, but to steady himself as if the holiness of the moment made standing impossible. And I held them, their knees, their silence, their unspoken songs, the way they looked at him like he was not just the hope of Israel, but the answer to every field they had ever walked, every prayer they had never dared to pray aloud. A star pulsed above, not static, but breathing, like it too bore witness. Its light spilled into the cracks of the stable, painting shadows with something more than illumination, and I drank it in. Not like sun, but like promise. I did not know what it meant, only that it changed everything it touched. The animals grew quiet, even the wind hushed, and I knew we were not waiting anymore. The wait had come, not finished, but begun, not solved, but present. Present in the smallest form, in the weakest frame. He slept, and I watched. I had no eyes, but I watched. Because every grain of me knew this was not a moment to forget, not a night to pass. This was the hint, the quiet shift in the story of stories, and somehow, impossibly, I was a part of it. The dust, the forgotten, the floor no one noticed. I, too, was chosen not for glory, but for gentleness. Not to shine, but to hold. And in that holding, I understood something no temple had ever taught me. That holiness does not descend in might, but in vulnerability. That the infinite does not crush, but curls up into sleep on straw and dirt. That God does not avoid dust, but chooses it, not as a mistake, as a cradle. I had feared I would never be clean enough, still enough, worthy enough. But he came anyway, not above me, not around mine to me. His weight so light, his presence so vast. And so I whispered the only thing I could, not with words, but with stillness. And I knew, though he could not yet walk, one day his feet would tread this earth again, and every place they touched would remember, as I do now, that even dust can be holy. He began to walk, not with certainty, not with glory, but with the wobbly, wide-eyed steps of a child discovering that the world has texture. His feet, small and unsteady, pressed into me as if trying to remember something older than language. I had held many children before, but none who paused after every step, not out of fear, but out of wonder. He would stop to look at an ant, tilt his head at the way light fell through leaves, crouch low to touch a pebble, as though it were a relic. I felt it all. His steps were not merely movement, they were recognition. He did not speak often, but when he did, the air seemed to still, not because his voice was loud, but because it carried a clarity that even the birds respected. He asked questions no child should ask, not because they were complicated, but because they were pure. Why does the wind come and go? Do trees remember? Can the stars hear us? I do not know if anyone answered him, but I did. Not with words, dust has no tongue, but with presence. I listened, I received, I remembered. His presence made even silence feel sacred. He ran, too, fast and free, the way only children do when they trust the world beneath them. And I bore him gladly. I softened where he fell. I caught him when he stumbled. And when he laughed, a sound so clean it made the olive trees shiver, wished I could hold that note forever. It was not just joy, it was the echo of something whole, something untouched by the heaviness of time. In Nazareth, he was not noticed, not much, just a carpenter's boy. But I noticed. I noticed the way he touched the ground before entering a home. I noticed how he paused before crossing a stream, as if greeting it. I noticed how he wept on cenot loudly, just quietly when he saw a bird caught in a snare. He freed it, then knelt beside me, and for a long time he said nothing, just rested his hand on the earth, on me. And in that touch, I felt it again, the same presence, the same knowing, that this boy was not only learning the world, he was healing it, simply by walking through it. I do not know if he knew who he was, but I think he knew whose he was. His confidence was never loud. It was the kind that made people stop arguing without knowing why. It was the kind that made other children share without being told. It was the kind that made the earth itself hope not in fear, but in fullness. One day, he found a beetle flipped on its back. Most children would poke it, maybe laugh, then move on. But he knelt, gently, slowly, as if the beetle were his brother. He turned it upright with a stick, then watched until it walked again. I remember the weight of his knees on the soil, the warmth of his breath near the ground. It was as though he was reminding all creation that nothing was too small to matter, that nothing low was beneath his care. The trees seemed to lean toward him. The birds paused their flight, and I, the earth, opened myself to hold him better. I watched him grow. The space between his steps widened. The calluses on his feet thickened. He worked with wood, and the scent of cedar and sweat became familiar. But he never lost the way. He paused for wonder, never stopped noticing things others missed. A cracked jar, a spider's web, a child's silence. He gave them his attention as though each bore a secret worth uncovering, and perhaps they did. People began to speak of him, not in reverence, not yet, but in curiosity. That boy, they'd say. He listens more than he talks. He helped my son, just with a glance. Strange child. Gentle, but strange. I heard them all. I remember when one man mocked him for not fighting back during a scuffle, but he only stepped aside, picked up the scattered olives from the ground, and handed them back to the boy who struck him, not with scorn, with peace. The man fell silent after that. I remember the shift. At night, he would sometimes lie on the hillside, hands behind his head, eyes fixed on the stars. He never spoke during those moments, but his silence was not emptiness, it was listening. Deep, holy listening, as though the stars were telling him stories only he could understand. I felt his back rise and fall against the slope. I held him as he dreamed, and though I could not dream, I wished I could, just to borrow his. There was a time he disappeared for a few days. The family searched. I felt the mother's footsteps turn frantic. The father's silence grew heavy, and then they found him, in the temple, speaking not like a child, but like someone who had waited centuries to be asked. "Did you not know I must be in my Father's house?" he said. But even then, he returned with them, back to ordinary, back to wood and dust and walking, back to me. And I, the ground, kept holding each step, each pause, each breath, not because he demanded it, but because I could not help it. There was something about him, something so quiet, so certain, as though he carried a melody too deep for instruments, too ancient for memory, and every grain of me resonated with that song. When he laughed, I felt whole. When he wept, I stayed soft. When he sat alone beneath the fig tree, I did not disturb him with wind or weight. I simply listened. Years passed, but he never lost the boy inside. Even as his shoulders broadened and his voice deepened, he still knelt beside injured sparrows, still watched the sun through olive branches, still walked like every inch of earth was sacred. And I began to believe it might be, not because of me, but because of him. He did not leave with ceremony, no trumpet, no farewell feast, just footsteps, steady, deliberate, quiet like the morning before heat rises. He walked the same path he had walked since childhood, but this time something was different. Not in the way his feet touched meth, they were still gentle, but in the direction of his silence. It was not inward anymore, it was forward, outward, as if he were listening to a call only he could hear, and finally, it was time to follow it. I held his first steps the way the sea holds returning rain. The village did not notice much. A mother waved, half distracted. A friend called out, "Come back soon," but no one understood what was truly leaving. I did. I felt the tension beneath each footprint, the knowing that something was ending, and something far greater had begun. He passed the olive groves, and the trees whispered their rustling goodbye. He paused once, touched the trunk of one old tree, pressed his forehead to it. Not long, just enough, and then he walked on, toward the river, toward John, toward the water that would not just cleanse, but reveal. I had heard of baptisms. I had held many feet before and after the plunge, but I had never held a moment that felt like this one. It was not just a man entering water. It was prophecy becoming presence. He stepped into the current, and I felt the shiver in the earth. Not fear, fulfillment. As if the soil beneath the riverbed remembered the promise before the promise had been spoken. The water embraced him, and heaven seemed to lean low. I did not see the dove, but I felt the air shift, the way only earth can feel the tremble of glory. When he emerged, dripping and new yet eternal, I knew with every grain of Methys was not the beginning of something. It was the unveiling of what had always been. And still, he did not linger. No crown, no parade. Just dust on his feet and sky in his eyes. He walked into the wilderness, where wind howled, where no one sang, where stones baked in silence. And I held him there, too. I watched his footprints grow deeper, slower, until they stopped. For days, I felt his weight without movement. A presence pressed into solitude, a fast not of food, but of clarity. And I held him, not to comfort, but to witness, to remember, because even here, where nothing grows, something eternal was rooting itself into the fabric of the world. He did not cry out. He did not argue. He simply endured the heat, the hunger, the whispering shadows that tried to tempt him. I felt the tension not just of a man tested, but of a choice being carved into the bones of the earth. "Turn these stones to bread," the voice said. But he didn't. He looked at the stone at me and chose hunger, chose trust, chose to be what the first had failed to be. And I, who had once borne the bite of disobedience, now bore the weight of faithfulness. When he finally walked again, his steps were slower, but firmer, not weary, resolved. And I felt something in creation respond not with noise, but with alignment. The way light shifts after cloud, the way rivers change direction in floods. He was not going back to Nazareth. He was going forward, Galilee, Cana, Capernaum, wherever feet were tired and hearts were closed, wherever the poor waited without knowing what they waited for. He would go there, and I would carry him. I remember the first time he spoke in public, not in a synagogue, not in a temple, on a hillside. The people stood on me, hungry for more than bread, and he began not with threats or commandments, but with blessings. "Blessed are the poor in spirit." The words sank into them, and into me. They changed the air. They made the dust sacred again, not because of law, because of love. Everywhere he went, I watched, not always in miracles. Sometimes just in the way he stopped for one person in a crowd of hundreds. Sometimes in how he looked at a sinner not to shame, but to see. Sometimes in how he touched the untouchable and never recoiled. He did not hover above me. He walked with weight, the weight of one who knew pain but chose compassion, the weight of heaven made flesh. He once knelt beside a leper, fingers pressed into my surface just before he reached to heal. His hand left a print, warm and firm, and I felt the power travel through him, not as lightning, but as peace. The man wept, fell to the ground, kissed the very soil where he had stood, and I held those tears as holy. I still do. He walked on, through towns, through fields, through moments that would one day be written in scrolls and whispered in caves and carved into hearts. But I knew them not as legend. I knew them as touch, as weight, as presence. He was never in a hurry, never distant. His pace was tuned to pain and possibility, to the pace of those forgotten, to the rhythm of the earth. And I, who had waited since Eden, now moved beneath him not just as ground, but as witness. He was here, he was moving, and the world would never be the same. There came a night unlike any before. He walked slower than usual. Not because he was tired, he had been tired before, but because something weighed on him beyond fatigue. I felt it in his steps, not heavier, but deeper. Like each footfall was marking something eternal into my surface. He moved through olive trees, and their branches reached for him, brushing his shoulders as if to offer comfort. But he did not speak. He only walked, and paused, then walked again. He stopped on a slope, the city lights glowing faintly below. I had held prophets here before. I had caught the tears of kings, but this night was different. He knelt and stayed, long enough that the dew began to settle on his robe, long enough that the silence stretched into something sacred. His hands touched the ground not as one claiming it, but as one returning to it, as if the dust mattered, as if I mattered. And then he whispered, not aloud, not to the trees, to the sky, perhaps, but I think it was to the Father. If it be your will. The rest came like breath pressed through sorrow. I did not understand the full weight of his words, but I felt the ground shift beneath them, as if the very earth recoiled not from him, but from what he was willing to carry. He pressed his face to me, warm, damp, not sweat alone, tears, blood. I absorbed them, stunned. Never had I held something so holy, so human. The pain did not scream, it sank, quiet, steady, infinite. He did not resist the soil, he embraced it. Like he had embraced the weak, the blind, the outcast. He laid himself down not to sleep, but to offer, and I trembled. Others came, friends, yet sleepy. I felt their feet shuffle, their hesitation. They did not understand the depth of what this night held. He asked them to watch, to stay near, but their eyelids fell heavy, and their breath slowed. They slept. And still, he remained awake, not in anger, in anguish. And I held him, not just with my surface, but with all that I was. He stood again, slowly, not with triumph, but with resolve. The kind of resolve that does not roar at roots. He walked a few paces, then stopped, as if listening, and I felt it, then the footsteps coming. The metal, the torches, the scent of betrayal clinging to the air like oil. And still, he waited. He did not run. He did not hide. He waited, and I knew this was love. Not soft, not sentimental, but love that walks into pain because others cannot. They came. I recognized some feet. One stepped closer, kissed him, and I felt the heartbreak echo through him like lightning beneath my crust. He did not resist. He only asked, "Do you betray me with a kiss?" And the question did not float away. It sank into me, deeper than spears, deeper than nails, because it came not from surprise, but sorrow. They took him, bound him, and as they dragged him across me, I did not pull away. I received his weight. I followed each step. I marked the places where he stumbled, where blood fell, where silence held more truth than any verdict. Later, they would say he was judged, mocked, struck, and I would remember not their words, but his silence, not the noise, but the steadiness of his steps. I bore them all, through stone streets and dusty alleys. I carried the splinters of the cross before the cross was made. I remembered how he once healed with mud, how he once spat into dirt and brought vision. Now that same earth received his blood and said nothing, but it remembered. I have been the cradle of many beginnings, but that night I became the witness of an ending that was not an end. As dawn threatened the edge of sky, I knew this was not just another arrest, not just another prophet silenced. This was the Lamb, the dust kneeler, the healer of all ground. And he was walking toward the place no one returns from, and he was doing it willingly. I had always believed that one day the heavens would come to claim the earth. That light would swallow darkness in a blaze. But now I saw it differently. Heaven had come, yes, but not to conquer, to be crushed, not to burn, to bleed. And the dust beneath his feet, that was me. I did not weep. I could not. I only held and remembered. Until then, I will keep the places he touched. I will carry the imprints of his sorrow and the weight of his resolve. I will remember the olive press, the kiss, the silence, the prayer. I will hold them beneath surface, like seeds waiting for spring. And when the stone rolls away, I will open, I will breathe. I will sing not with sound, but with resurrection, because he was here, and he is coming back. I will be ready when his feet return. I will know him by the weight,